All right, hello and welcome. This is a special spotlight video highlighting one of the members of the UL Lafayette Psychology Department, Dr. Christie Charles.
Good afternoon, everyone.
So I wanted to speak to you and have you share a little bit about your experiences in the world of psychology, and I think also at UL Lafayette as a woman of color. This is Black History Month. So what has it been like for you to be in the world of psychology as a woman of color?
Well, first, before I specifically answer that great question, Miss Story, I want to begin by thanking you for this wonderful opportunity and for your willingness to spotlight me. I'm very excited to be with you today. So, just to make sure I'm answering correctly, the question was just kind of my experience being a person of color in the field of psychology.
Yes.
Full honesty, transparency, it's been great. And I think it has a lot to do with the great professionals within the field. The fact that the field of psychology continues to be more inclusive, more diverse. There's a great emphasis on equity. And dare I say, it's not just a wonderful field of psychology, but society as a whole. I think we're embracing DEI initiatives, and we just want to be more inclusive. So I'm just very excited to be a part of the field of psychology. And what attracted me to the field was this great emphasis on inclusion and just making me feel so welcomed and valued.
That's lovely. I was thinking about our department kind of as a whole. I mean, psychology as a field, like much of academia, has been traditionally very white, very male. The mental health field seemed to be more dominated recently with women, which is an interesting thing that I think has happened as we talk about like minorities. But I still think that there's so much work to be done in terms of, all the different groups of people of color, different cultures in this field. I wonder if you think back to like little Christie, what drew you to psychology? Did you have like a mentor or somebody that inspired you to come into this science?
Oh, that's a great question. And thank you for taking me back in time, Whitney. What attracted me to the field of psychology was the fact that it's a helping profession. You being not only a faculty member, a colleague of mine, but also being an amazing advisor. When we ask our students why psychology, a common response, it's like, oh, I want to help people. My friends come and they talk to me. I feel as if I give good advice. And those are some great answers. And that's where I was back in the day. The fact that it was a great helping profession that really attracted me, but just really becoming more and more immersed in the field. Psychology is more than helping by talking. We get training as far as assessment. We get training as far as ethics and ethical treatment of clients, be it in a hospital or in a classroom or in a corporation. So I stayed in psychology because I realized that it wasn't just about the talking and the actual interactions. More goes into that as far as preparation, how you serve your clients. So yeah, but it started with me just wanting to help others. And I vividly remember being from Louisiana. My hometown is St. Martinville, Louisiana. And as a person of color, I remember my family members talking about Dr. Tyler, an African-American male who was a psychiatrist. And it's like, oh, that representation as a person of color made it possible for me to even believe that this was a possible avenue, even though he was in psychiatry and I took the path of psychology. It was just still great to have that representation. And even though Dr. Tyler, he's been gone, he was taken away from us many years ago, his legacy still remains. And yeah, that was very important to me, just wanting to help people.
Yeah, there's so many different paths that people can take. And I was thinking about like your kind of focus in on IO psychology. When people think about helping people, I think most of us do imagine like, the therapist, the client, and like doing talk therapy, but like the client can look so many different ways, even all the way to the organization. So how did you find your way into IO psychology?
Oh my goodness. It wasn't an easy path. In actuality, going back to little Christie, I had aspirations of kind of going down the clinical path. And when I elected to enter our university as an undergrad, I still had aspirations of getting into clinical psychology. And kind of a defining moment for me was when Dr. Tyler was taken away from us by one of his clients. And right there, I started thinking, is this something that I really want to do? I mean, any job, you're putting yourself in harm's way. But I remember that was a defining moment. But even after that happened, it didn't really deter me. I was still like, okay, clinical. But a defining moment for me, an additional defining moment, I was like really at the graduation ceremony, about ready to receive my bachelor's degree, and I'm there and I'm excited. My family members are there, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm gonna do next. And I started to really feel like clinical wasn't for me. Clinical is a very important subfield specialty area of psychology, but it wasn't for me. I did not want to deal with psychopathology every day. I felt I wasn't built for it. So I started to think, what's next? And then I stumbled into school psychology. As an educator, I was like, oh, I'm going to teach teachers how to become effective teachers, how to create an effective classroom environment. And actually, my thesis kind of centered on that, the classroom environment. And lo and behold, I was driving one day. I was approaching my second graduation ceremony, about ready to receive my master's degree. And so I'm like, okay, I need to supplement my income. I need to make some big girl money. And I started to think, wow, a lot of people spend their adult life with strangers, more specifically in the workplace. And I started to think for a second, the working environments I had been a part of, and some of the good aspects, some of the not so good aspects. And at that very moment, I'm like, this might be a viable option for me. And I remember teaching a summer class. I was teaching the IO class for the first time. And as I was educating my students, I was kind of educating myself, like, oh, work motivation, job satisfaction, proper hiring of people. I'm like, oh my goodness. I think I was probably more excited than my students that first semester I taught that course. And that's how I fell in love with IO psychology, because again, many of us spend a lot of hours with strangers, and we talk about creating effective homes. We talk about creating effective classrooms. Do we talk enough about creating effective working environments? And today's employee demands a lot, rightfully so. We're not like the traditional employee, maybe from the baby boomer generation where you just go to work, you clock in, you go to, you show up, you do your job, and then you clock out and leave. Today's employees are demanding of much more. They want work family balance. They want their organizations to be effective representations of them. So it's like, okay, I just felt this was a perfect fit for me years ago, and I'm still a part of the wonderful world of IO psychology.
I think that it's such a cool field, especially when I'm thinking about the way that things have changed, even just over the last couple of years with COVID. Like, the workplace seems to be a place that's constantly evolving. And just the wide variety of workplaces that exist, I think the research potential must be just phenomenal in the world of IO Psych. And I think probably like the application of the research is also really, really, an area where people can do a lot of really good stuff. So it's fascinating. What have you learned, or what do you know? What could you share with students, people watching this video, about especially minority workplace interaction?
But to piggyback off of what you just said, and some great comments, Whitney, I want to celebrate. I just celebrated today's workers, right? Today's employees, and how assertive they are, how passionate they are, and they're teaching us some great stuff. But I want to commend employers. A lot of employers are realizing the importance of a healthy work environment. And that's the thing. And that's really what excites me. I love research, and I do love going through the research process. But what really, really, really excites me is the application. So to kind of transition into your question about what I want to tell students, maybe specifically students of color, is that this is a psychology is awesome. A lot of industries are also awesome. We collaborate with engineers, with sociologists, with lawyers. So we are a collaborative group. But I just want people to know there's potential, whether you go in and you want to be a manager slash leader, or you just want to go in and you just want to enter the workplace, be primarily responsible for yourself, or maybe you want to get into HR, or maybe you have ambition to be the president, CEO. Understanding how to interact with people, how to address people, not only in a written fashion, but in a verbal fashion, non-verbally, like body language. All of those things are very, 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 very important. And that's why diversity is it's essential that we have diversity, that we have inclusion, because representation is so important. Yes, is it a challenge? I could tell you I've worked with different types of people, not just based on ethnicity slash race or gender. It could be based on age. It could be based on personality traits. And it is tough when you're working with people who maybe don't think like you, people who don't act like you. But I could tell you, speaking from personal experience, and the research shows this, that short term, you will have your issues. You have to work out the kinks. But long term, companies are better. We are better as individuals. We are better as a society when we have diversity. We want everyone to feel as if they have a place. We are more creative. We have better decision making. And we could literally welcome great customers, because a lot of customers, they do look at that. They look for that. It's like, is your company diverse? Do I see someone who looks like me? What are your policies, procedures? What are your passion points? So I think any change that we want to see, it begins with our students, the next generation, and just kind of articulating the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah, and I think the modeling that we offer, I mean, just generally, we as like a general term, not specifically you and I, but also you and I, the modeling that we offer is so important, you know, for students coming to UL and to be able to see, you know, Dr. Christie Charles doing her thing, and then being able to imagine them doing the same thing. And I think our department, when I'm thinking about like the history of the psychology department here at UL, the fact that our department has been led by women for over 50 years is so interesting and so powerful. Including, you know, I'm sure you know, I'm preaching to the choir, but one of our previous department heads, Dr. Garrett, being a woman of color, what a powerful message to our students, to the university at large. Yeah. So what about, could you tell us a little bit about your research, stuff you've done in the past, stuff that you might be really excited about right now? What you got going on?
Awesome. But Whitney, please, I want to comment on what you just said. And when I speak of representation, I speak of representation from the standpoint of maybe people who look like me. It's like I want them to see the possibilities, but equally important is for people who do not look like me to see the possibilities, you know. And I'm getting goosebumps, you know, when we are teaching, we're not teaching to one specific group. We do have diversity, and some of the differences we can maybe overtly see, but some of the differences we may not see. But it's an amazing thing when people can come together and they can learn from each other. And maybe it's just for a second, we forget about all of those things that make us different. And I'm not suggesting that we will always agree. And I'm not suggesting that we are not biased. Can I tell you, I am biased as a woman. You know, I have, not to say a certain way of thinking, but I have my biases. I'm African American. I've been reared in the South all my life. And I think if we are willing to acknowledge our biases and stereotypes, but also be willing to do that for other people and not just be so judgmental. We need to be patient. You know, a great comment you just made was the leadership and how we have been led by amazing women. But I never want that to be at the detriment of men. You know, when we speak of diversity, it should never be at the expense of the majority. So something I was thinking about recently, because I talked about this in one of my classes, like, oh, no, women, we're like, not say dominating, but we are kind of leading psychology.
Yeah.
And of course, like, oh, I am woman, hear me roar. But we got to pause for a second. And I paused myself because I don't want to forget about the men who need help and how they also look for representation. So it's tricky, but what we don't want to do is tip the scales the other way, right? But to also, I want to comment on Dr. Eileen Garrett, who was one of our amazing department heads. And I spoke of defining moments, and this was another defining moment in my life, to have an African American female from my hometown of St. Martinville be actively involved in psychology was an amazing thing for me to see. But again, not minimizing the wonderful roles that others have played. Even to this day, one of my great mentors, that I talk about, he is a Caucasian male. So to always remember, as we speak of diversity, equity, and inclusion, not to forget about that awesome balance. So what am I doing right now? I always tell people anything work related, I'm interested in. But if it's work related, throw out the topic, and I'm pretty sure we can make it work. I get excited about it. A cool project that we're working on right now, it's on pregnancy discrimination, and specifically we're looking at anticipated discrimination versus experienced discrimination, and how women may manage their pregnancy because they are worried about being discriminated against. That's a cool project. But I have another project where we're looking at the implications of COVID-19 and how students were impacted mentally and what services did they utilize. So that's not really work related, but it also speaks to my passion to serve the university and serve our students. But yeah, and there's another project that I'm very excited about. We're looking at name bias, and just like it could be based on how you spell your name or how you're going to pronounce your name. Could that possibly impact hiring decisions or someone's willingness to want to work with those types of individuals? So again, anything work related, I'm very excited about. But based on what I just shared, you could kind of tell that I have a passion for discrimination. I care about protected, marginalized groups, like disability, like sexual orientation, like age. I'm 47, so it's like, will somebody look at me? It's like, oh, you're possibly too old, or you're losing value. So it's not just things that are tied to race, ethnicity. Of course, I love those topics, but just anything dealing with the workplace in general, I love.
I didn't warn you about this question, but I
Ooh.
was just thinking, do you have, so you've mentioned some of your like modern mentors and people you looked up to, and I would include Dr. Tyler in that. Do you have like a favorite historical psychology person?
Oh my goodness. That's kind of a tough one. I guess if I had to pick one, would be probably Dr. Albert Bandura. I just and he is a Caucasian male. I think for me, and observational learning has always been a very interesting thing to me, for me. I think it's because it's been a way that I've learned throughout my life. Before doing, I like to observe and see if I can mirror. So I just loved his study on aggression. But I do want to take the time out to just thank you for the wonderful job you've been doing informing us of about these wonderful historical figures in psychology. You know, one that you shared recently had to do with the doll study, and how even to this day, because the first study has been replicated, and how people will young kids will look at two dolls and then make inferences and decisions and choices kind of based on color. But I will always go back to observational learning, because that's again a powerful way. I actually use it as a training technique when I'm training people in the workplace. So I always kind of go back to Albert Bandura.
Such a classic. And I'm thinking about it even through the lens of, what we've been talking about this whole conversation. So interesting. Anything else you'd like to share with our viewers before we wrap up this lovely discussion?
I spoke of biases, and I will admit to one major one. I love psychology. I would encourage any student to consider psychology as a major. But even if psychology isn't your major, you are better served by taking psych classes, because these classes are applicable in any setting, whether you're in the courtroom trying to defend your client or prosecute someone, whether you're in a hospital and you're trying to disclose some good or bad information, or whether you're in a classroom just understanding how to deal with people is so very important. Gaining an understanding of the mind and behavior is so very important. So yeah, I would just encourage anyone to take a couple of psych classes if psychology isn't your major, and just continue to find mentors. I've had some great mentors. You've had some great mentors, and mentorship is so very important. And I would love to thank everyone for taking the time out and just viewing this video.
Thank you so much. This was so lovely.